A sustainable business is one that operates without impacting the environment negatively. Around the world and in India, there is an increasing emphasis for businesses to be sustainable and ensure that they care for the environment and the society. How does a business go about it? Will businesses have the money, time, and know-how to be sustainable? Let's delve on each of these issues in this very special Earth Day panel discussion. We have with us today Rene van Berkel, who heads the Regional Office of United Nations Industrial Development Organization in India, Venkat Kotamaraju, Director, Circular Apparel Innovation Factory, Mahadev Chikkanna Founder CEO, Mynusco, and Kunal Sood, Impact Entrepreneur and Founder of X-Fellows and WeThePlanet. Thank you all for joining us today. Let me, the Puma Declaration of 2013 talked about a vision of inclusive and sustainable industrial development. So what do these words, inclusive, sustainable, mean in this context, and why is it important for us?
Yes, thank you very much. And UNIDO, the Industrial Development Organization of the UN, really stands for inclusive and sustainable industrial development. And that's also linked to Sustainable Development Goal 9 in the 2030 agenda. So I think that these words of inclusive and sustainable are quite abstract terms, but it's clear that it is expected that industrialization contributes to manufacturing competitiveness, productivity, and innovation in the economic terms, and then in terms of inclusiveness to quality of work, decent work, rewarding jobs, and then also environmental sustainability. Or I sometimes say for the MSME segment or small business segment, it's really making sure that we set up factories that are fit for the future because they have addressed the challenges of the past. And so they produce goods and services that are sought after in the market, that have a good quality, that don't need special support to be procured by people, then that are also meeting and exceeding environmental standards. So compliance with environmental rules is taken for granted as it is for compliance, and then also moving in the right direction, and that also are inclusive in the terms of taking care of the people and the communities in which they operate with decent pay, but also decent working conditions, taking care of occupational community health and safety. So it's really making sure that industrialization happens within the context of having an economic contribution, an impact on the people that contribute, and safeguards the environment.
Right. Venkat, if I can come to, you are part of an industry or a sector which has often been accused of the, polluters of environment. And I think there are figures, it's estimated that, the fashion industry is responsible for 10% of global carbon emissions, more than the international flights and maritime shipping combined. So in this context, what does circular and sustainable mean, at least for the apparel industry?
No, first, absolutely. And I think it's quite a shocker, right? Imagine if a sector like fashion industry contributes to more greenhouse gas emissions, more than maritime and transportation put together. I think what it means to be circular in the context of, the fashion industry or any sector for that matter is, how do we make the choices in terms of the materials that we use, right? So let me give you a little bit of context. Bulk of the carbon emissions in the whole process, right? So right from raw material to the end product, 60 to 70% of the carbon emissions happen in the upstream production stage, which means the choices we make in terms of the materials that we are using, how do we source them, how are they grown? So imagine if cotton is one of those raw materials, how is cotton grown? How much does it consume in terms of energy, in terms of water, in terms of other natural resources? What kind of processes that are we using in terms of efficiency processes, from a water efficiency, from an energy efficiency point of view? What kind of a business model do we follow as an organization, right? Whether we are a retail entity which has a customer-facing component to it, then hence the business model that we use to operate, to engage with our customers, to engage with the suppliers and vendors on the other end of the spectrum. It's something as simple as saying, how do we keep materials in use for a longer period of time? And I think, like you rightly said, we've been accused for being one of the bad boys as far as sustainability is concerned, and rightly so. If you can keep, and I think one of the culprits is the fast fashion model, right, which is makes it really accessible and from a price point in terms of the latest designs or latest fashion being available at fingertips. So you're typically, let's say, over compared to 10 years, 15 years back, as an average consumer, if I was holding on to a piece of clothing for let's say 4 years or 5 years, today I'm really circulating or refurbishing my wardrobe every few months, because fast fashion makes it very easily accessible in terms of price point or in terms of accessibility from a physical or space point of view. So, but that's one aspect in terms of the planet outcomes. And I think the larger aspect, which tends to get missed out in the dominant global narrative around circular economy, is that the choices we make in terms of material usage, in terms of process, in terms of business models, how does that also translate into benefits that are inclusive and distributive, right? And the point there is that in India, only in India itself, we are the second largest employer of workforce behind agriculture. And a big chunk of that is women. And a big chunk of those are informal workers, right? So home-based workers, SDGs, the waste workers, waste people, the individuals and communities that are part of, let's say, waste collection, are informal in that nature and very fragmented. And they play such a critical job in a critical role in the entire value chain. Do the benefits of economic progress or economic value creation in running any organization or any sector, how does that even translate? Does it trickle down to these informal workers? So it's got to be a balance of both planet positive outcomes as well as people positive outcomes, right? So from a circular economy point of view, just to kind of sum it up, on one side, from a economical and from an ecological point of view, a business has to be, the benefits of the business or running a business or being in business has to be regenerative and rejuvenative. But on the other side, from a people perspective, whether you're directly or indirectly employing them, whether you're formally or informally employing them, does the benefit of being in business or doing business in any form, are those benefits inclusive and distributive, right? So for me, those four operating words of what being circular or what being sustainable business would be regenerative, rejuvenative, inclusive, and distributive. So for me, it's an aspect or different dimensions of these four that really kind of dictate whether doing lip service to being circular or sustainable, or whether you really have a skin in the game.
Right. So Mahadev, Venkat just laid out four dimensions to you really have the skin in your game. But how can a company actually determine if they are sustainable? Is there any measurement, yardstick that determines that, okay, yes, this is the sustainable level of a business?
From a sustainability standpoint, right? Understanding the sustainable impact, gathering data, reporting has been evolving for the last, let's say, 30, 40 years. Starting from 1985, if you see, it was all about environmental reporting. Then it shifted to corporate social responsibility, which was extension of environment into society as well. And then it evolved into triple bottom line, which brought the business, the environment, and society together. If we really look at the top down today, GRI and BRSR reporting is one of the most accepted reporting standards that encompasses all aspects of sustainability. It's not just environmental aspect. There are also certain ISO standards which are only, or ISO or CDP standards which are specific to environment only. And this gets down to further narrows down to like ISO 14064, which is specific to product lifecycle assessment, right? There are a number of standards, number of ways of reporting this, but a lot of them are relevant for large corporates because they have resources to work on these, they have enough data to capture and report this data. But for small and medium enterprises like ours, trying to have such a comprehensive reporting methodology is one, quite expensive, but also becomes a challenge because we don't have resources doing different things. We have like resources doing multiple things together, right? There I see that a triple bottom line reporting, something that what we say as social, ecological, and economic impact, is an undisputed interdependency. I mean, nobody can dispute the dependency between these three. If small enterprises can look at their impact in terms of society, in terms of the environment, and in terms of the economics, I think that should be sufficient. What United Nations has done fantastic is that they have clearly classified sustainability goals into 7 SDGs. I think that is one of the most layman understandable version of what sustainable development is all about, the scope of sustainability. So we at Mynusco have classified those sustainable development goals against social, environment, and ecological impact. And for every decision that we do, we try to kind of measure against them, not just reporting at the end of the financial year or so. So I believe smaller companies can adopt to simpler steps, like looking at how they are contributing across the social, ecological, and environment impact. I think that would be fantastic to start with.
Interesting. Kunal, if I can come to you, do you think that there is a recognition in India, and especially the business community, about the risk that a lack of sustainable thinking can bring?
I think there is a recognition. So I wouldn't say there's no recognition. I think worldwide, it starts at the top. So I think the person who's recognized it the most, in my humble opinion, has been our own Prime Minister. So he's become a real champion for climate change, for green energy, for industrial optimization, exponential technologies coming into the country. And if we see the helm, meaning the leaders at the helm do that, it often does trickle down, but to what extent? And that's what I'm curious about. I think the way to succeed would be to have both a top-down but also a bottom-up approach. So you have, the true wealth in India, in my humble opinion, coming home after 20 years and really loving what I experience, is the true wealth is on the ground. It's with the chaiwala, it's with the person in my factory. It's the people that are truly connected to the earth, that understand what sustainability really means. And pardon me, I love the sustainable development goals, but I also know who designed them, and I do know a few people that did that. And it's a wonderful framework, but will it be achieved? Even the UN is racking their brains around the next 8 years and 7 years, in fact. So I think the achievability is the most important thing, and it's time bound, right? Whereas I think sustainability doesn't need to be time bound. It just has to be more goal focused and task bound. So how can you achieve a certain task that helps make certain parts of your own business sustainable versus, this idea by 2030, we're going to get to this magnum opus goal and save the world. Start with the next couple of years and create like a true plan of action around what does it feel like to be sustainable as a startup or as a small business or even as a bigger business. What does sustainability look like for the ecosystem that we're building together? And I think that's a very important piece of this, is building communities that actually share and believe in the idea of sustainable development. Because the sound bites are great, but you wanted to translate into music for real world impact, right? So that music carries on into the future, and everyone starts to really walk, arm in arm around how are we going to save our planet for ourselves. Listen, the planet really doesn't need us. We've had many extinctions in the past, so I think there is this way in which we need each other more than ever before. So for me, sustainability is really about having each other's backs, working together, whether it's with UNIDO or, with Mahadev, who has his own company and concern. And I think it's a very important aspect of this sustainable development is to harness as well as activate the power of collaboration in action, not just in words. And it's not easy. For me, it's been tremendously hard over the last decade, and coming back home, it's shown me the massive opportunity, but also the massive, task ahead to really find and develop these relationships to achieve the SDGs, as we call them, favorably at the United Nations.
Interesting. Rene, Kunal talks about, the time frame that we have, 2030. Personally, do you think we are on track, especially India, to meet some of those goals? You've been working, I know UNIDO and yourself working tirelessly to get, businesses and manufacturing units to, the sustainable level. Do you think personally we are set on the target? What are the problems that you see when it comes to sustainable transition, and what can be some of the ways to overcome them? You have some examples as well?
Yes, thank you. And I think the coming on from Kunal, yes, the SDGs are an agenda for 2030, as it is called. So it is kind of a time bound, and sustainability. I think when I was still at college, we said it's a journey, it's not a destiny. So there will be always kind of a continuous improvement journey, and what is sustainable is a relative perception in that sense. So I wouldn't bind too much on what is the 2030 goals. It's a good stick in the sand where we would like to be by 2030. I think there was good progress, but undoubtedly we've been put back by the COVID pandemic over the last 2 years. So it's clear that more people are back into poverty, extreme poverty, and that there's more challenges. You might say that maybe on the positive side, the greenhouse gas emissions have not increased as much as was projected by some. But I think overall we must say that the pandemic has put us back a few years in terms of achieving the SDGs, and whether we will achieve is highly questionable. But I will also say, well, as long as we are markedly on progress, I think that we need to look at progress and how we can recover, and also take the process of recovery as a means to reinvigorate the sustainability agenda. Let us not forget that ultimately the pandemic is also an environmental crisis, because it is a conflict of man with nature which caused this. And this I can see, and maybe this is more in large business, but maybe it's also around the society. People are saying that if this pandemic, which was also kind of predicted, but maybe not so profoundly, it was not predicted whether it was COVID or another, but something of this scale could happen, and it was ignored. And we know with quite great certainty that climate change is happening. So if this pandemic could do this, what will climate change do? So I see a renewed interest. And UNIDO also in its industrial development report, which came out earlier this year, looked at manufacturing in the post-pandemic era. And then we see clearly drivers for and shapers for this manufacturing development. And green is one of the key drivers in there. So there will be a green transition. There's no way out. And we also see it. Then I come to the examples that you were calling about. I think that we see that initially when the pandemic hit, many people were projecting that the environment will be on the back burner, and we will get back to the old adagium from develop first and clean up later. But I personally feel as an observer that this might not have happened, and companies have realized that now that the economics are adverse, it's not so easy to grow your business by selling more. So you can only grow your business by becoming more efficient and more productive. And that has unlocked a lot of people to look at energy efficiency, for example. We can see that in our work, and just to give an example, we work with Bureau of Energy Efficiency with the MSME sector. We did in the last 18 months, we did something like 695 MSMEs, which we helped to invest in energy efficiency. They invested something like 157 crores, but they save 60 crores. So this is kind of a payback of 2.5 years. It's not that you make or break your business, but certainly it is absolutely undermining the expectation that being green puts you in the red. It's not true. So being green can really unlock business opportunities, and that will also be the way forward. That focusing on environment, focusing on energy will help companies to unlock inefficiencies which they have, which will give them then also better productivity and innovation. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
So Venkat,
mind me chiming in? If I can just chime in both what Kunal said as well as Rene said, right? Which is, I don't think there's any arguments on whether we'll be able to achieve any of those ambitious goals within that timeline, right? But I think One of the things that we have conversations with, the brands and the manufacturers and the MSMEs in the textile space, for example, is not as much as what can we achieve in the next 5 years or 10 years time frame, but are we investing today in those capabilities and capacities and recognizing the fact that we need to change the way we're doing business or the way we engage with the other organizations, right? So I'm just giving an extreme example, right? There's a lot of effort that's happening on how do we eradicate poverty. Is that something that's achievable within our lifetime? Questionable. But have we made progress? Have we actually come together as different organizations in the ecosystem, right? Because when we tend to look at it as what one single organization, a brand or an A manufacturer, one single MSME can achieve, and of course that becomes a very daunting task. But how can we all come together, right? That's one. And I think what Rene was saying is while there is one lens which looks at the kind of regression that has happened over the last 2 years thanks to the pandemic. But I think being an eternal optimist, I guess, is the difference is we've seen a lot more brands who have actively set net zero ambitions, for example. There's a renewed appetite for saying, hey, I alone can't do this as an organization. How can I collaborate with my so-called competitor to actually test out a solution, right? So I'm sharing my risk as well as the rewards, right? So there is definitely a renewed effort. In our conversations, my last point would be in our conversations, what we're seeing is there's a better translation of intent to action that we've seen in the last 18 months as compared to the pre-COVID times. And I think just to give you one tangible example, organizations, irrespective of size and scale and where you're operating from, you're always raising capital. You always need capital, right? Today, that capital is not easy to come through, whatever the source of capital might be, because you're being asked those questions on what your performance is, what your markers of ESG or any other form that you might look at. How are you operating? Because so that access to capital has become very, very difficult. Second is, well, in India, of course, compared to, let's say, European consumers who are a little ahead of the curve, the consumers are going to dictate whether you have the right to business, which is if you do not have the right markers of why you're in business and how you're doing business, the proof of the pudding is somebody who's going to buy your product or service. And those consumers who are making the choice are a lot more evolved and a lot more educated and aware today to be able to make those choices, which might determine the fortunes of any organization. It doesn't have to be even an SMB. Even some of the largest organizations have been taken to the laundry because consumers have asked the hard questions, right? So, and I'll just take a pause there.
Right. If I can stay with you and, we understand, Rene talked about energy efficiency. One of the aspects that the fashion industry does not do very efficiently is water consumption. For example, it takes about 2,000 gallons of water to produce a pair of jeans. What is the industry doing to reduce consumption of water and at the same time reduce pollution of water? Are you seeing some solutions come around it? What is it that you see around the world?
Right. So, no, absolutely. And I think that number of 2,700, and I think it translates to what an average individual would consume over a period of 2.5 years, right? So, I think there's a slight context, right? When we look at water as a resource, we know that as of date, the gap between the demand and supply of water as a finite resource is going to be 50%. There's a shortage of 50% by 2030. That's the broader global estimate. There are a lot of solutions on how to reduce the consumption of water per se. There are solutions that look at how do you bring in efficiency in water usage, which means how do you make sure that you're replacing X percentage or more than almost 100% of your virgin water usage with recycled water, which is how do you ensure solutions and processes in place so that you're able to recover and reclaim value, right? So that's the resource efficiency aspect. We collaborate a lot with Rene's team. So one of the programs, fantastic program that they do is the FLCDD, right? So we've got two of those enterprises that have been part of the FLCD program at UNIDO. who are now working with a couple of brands and manufacturers. On an average, for example, on an energy side, we say any manufacturer requires about 15 to 20%, 15 to 25% of their operating cost comes in energy. And if you one single solution, one single low carbon tech service provider in the energy efficiency space can contribute to year-on-year 15% reduction in energy. For a manufacturer, for example, and I'm not naming them, that translates to savings of anything up to 200 crores over a 5 to 7 year period. And that's quite substantial, no matter how big you are. If you translate that into a smaller supplier or a smaller manufacturer, because our industry is largely fragmented on these small players, right? That straight away contributes to the bottom line. That significantly changes the dynamics of how best you're able to offer the same product with the price competitiveness that comes from reducing your operating cost by 15 to 20%, right? Similarly, we've got solutions on the water space as well. There are a lot of solutions that have been tried and tested across different sectors. So one of the things we see is, looking at something that has worked with, let's say, an FMCG player, we try to replicate the similar viability of it in the textile, the fashion industry, and create more use cases. And that's the only way it's going to happen. And I think suddenly you've got to open your mind to not just looking at possibilities within one sector, especially in the context of energy or water or plastics, because it's cross-cutting, and look at what's happening somewhere else, which might be relevant to your sector or your geography or region as well.
Different use cases. Mahadev, we can come to you. What are some of the practical ways that companies can reduce their carbon footprint? Will it be costly to make that transition? And like Rene and Venkat talked about, have people and businesses become more receptive to sustainability thoughts after the pandemic? What are you seeing?
Yeah, the word carbon footprint can actually scare people. It might look that it's a very complex problem to solve, but if I have to summarize it down to 2 steps, companies have to look for renewable and repurposed resources. That's first, not only for their operations, but the products and packaging that they would introduce into the market. Secondly, they will have to work towards preventing waste. Right? Again, not just looking at their own operations, but the services that they bring to market. As an example, it's just not enough to make sure that there is zero waste discharge or the waste that's produced at the factory is handled well enough. But the questions that the companies need to ask is the products and packaging that they are creating, is it really resulting in waste? Are they durable enough? Are they circular in a nature? That are they designed in such a way that they could be easily dismantled at their end of life and then put them back into a new circular loop, basically? So for me, I think if companies start to take their decisions in terms of their operations, in terms of their products and services, to increase use of renewable and recovered resources, and designing for preventing waste, I think that should be sufficient. This is all that they need to do. And the shift is not a 0 to 1 shift. It's not a binary shift. It's always an incremental shift. They can start the benchmark what it is today, and they can come up with the plan where it needs to be and gradually work towards it. As far as the cost is concerned, it's very subjective. Let's say if it's an IT company sitting in offices, for them the shift is going to be reasonably quick. They have to make sure that the energy that they get is from renewable source, and they have 2 ways. One is put up their own plant, which would be capex intensive, or source from suppliers of renewable energy, which is available today, right? But if it is in the manufacturing sector, it could be a lot more complex, where there are people moving around, there's machinery, there are products, materials in and out. So managing that could be a lot more complex. And especially in the manufacturing sector, it's not just the materials or the processes that would be useful. Like Venkat mentioned, collaboration and partnership is extremely essential. As an example, let's say if a toy manufacturing company wants to really bring a sustainable product. Today, 90% of the toys are made out of plastic, which each kg produces about 2 to 3 kgs of carbon emission. Unless they have partners who can supply materials which are carbon negative in nature, and unless they have suppliers who are converting these materials into finished goods in an acceptable way, it would not be viable. So the partnership at the downstream and upstream is extremely important. a lot of time companies would not be able to drive these partnerships themselves because they would be working on certain pressing timelines or deliverables, finance and stuff. That's where organizations like the one which Venkat is with can help bring that collaboration from outside in, get the right parties to work together in solving problem which cannot be solved within a single company. It has to cut across the supply chain. It has to cut across the value chain. So I think that is paramount important to take this beyond just having operations being carbon negative.
Right. Now, if I can come to you, sustainability is not just good for Earth, but also for business. Do you believe, this can inspire different stakeholders like talent, consumers, partners, regulators, investors? And is sustainability now mainstream? Now, Venkat talked about consumers, especially more so in the European countries, where they are more cognizant of the fact about what they're wearing and stuff like that. Do you see that more in the mainstream now?
I mean, there's definitely a pulse of sustainability in the mainstream. But I think there's a bigger problem that needs to be addressed here and now. Clearly, from what everyone has said on the panel, we don't have a resource or a technological innovation problem. What we really have here and now is a leadership problem. And in my humble opinion and observation, we need to treat saving ourselves, also known as the planet, as we do rocket science. We need to treat it with the same power and force we do with becoming Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or whatever Forbes list we've seen out there. And for me, that's going to be the tipping point at which we start to really take these things and make them more serious business. So there is definitely a sense of desire and urgency, but it's not enough. The guideposts are great, but we really need to find out how this becomes more of a startup innovation culture that permeates every single person. How does sustainability really become the heart and DNA and soul of all ecosystems and organizations that exist? But to answer your question, yeah, sure, there is a pulse and there is a desire to be sustainable. There are two, now here I'm speaking to the choir. There's a guy who runs UNIDO, there's a guy, believes in sustainability, there's a guy who wants to be sustainable by nature in the small business, medium sector. There's a whole group of people out there that we're not talking to. And they're not listening, right? So it's like a 50-50 model right now. So what does mainstream really mean? To me, mainstream is about going 100%, not just talking to the left, and the right does whatever they want because the left will fix it. I think it involves everyone. All of us have to come together, and we also have to listen to the right. So to understand what the mindset is, because that's fundamentally what we're talking about over here, right? A mindset. When we talk about something becoming mainstream, it's a mindset that becomes mainstream, and then you do things together. So I think that's the most important piece, the leadership and the mindset. How do we create a sustainable mindset, meaning a sustainability focused mindset, not just among the top, but also amongst every single person in that organization, or even the household? Start in the home, right? Start with yourself. I always ask myself, especially coming back to India, how can I change the world if I can't even change myself? So for me, it's really, that's what I focus on, is taking sustainability mainstream. It's by starting with yourself, seeing what you can affect in your surrounding, and then, using the megaphone, which, like when I brought TED to the United Nations, it was one of the best things we did. We curated TED, and it was like, wow, all these people actually listen. Then we did incredible work with the SG as well as the PGA, which are fancy acronyms, which I'm sure Rene speaks to on a regular basis at the United Nations. But working along with the top is important, but I think it's more important to work with those that don't know and haven't heard of the Sustainable Development Goals, don't really understand what it is to be sustainable as a business or as a family or as a culture. And I think that's where the opportunity exists, mainly to drive sustainable, education. It exists in those pockets, in those corners of the world that don't know. yet what it means to be mainstream and sustainable. But yeah, I'm hoping, I'm very hopeful. I'm also not an eternal optimist, but cautiously optimistic of our future.
Rene, coming to you, what is the role of international trade when it comes to providing an opportunity for firms? For example, with globalization and integration via the global value chains, can firms become more sustainable? Can it also help reduce the gaps that exist in national levels? And are we seeing that linkage between global trade and sustainability as well?
That's a lot of questions, but if I may, let me also just respond to build upon what Kunal was just saying. I think that really the challenge is to mainstream, and I would be the last one to say that we're already at 50-50 in a sense. We are still talking about front runners and a big group of laggards and a group of obstinate non-willers, if I may call it that way. But I not necessarily want to blame the people, and I can say that they might not know, but I don't want to say that they are unwilling or so. That we still have a message to explain on how these environment and sustainability issues are material to these businesses and how it can be unpacked and what small business can do. So if I have a small bakery or so, what can I do from an environmental point of view? How is my business operation linked to climate change, or how can I do that? And we also often say that in terms of occupational health and safety. So people are saying, why should I invest in doing in leveling my floor in my dye house? And I just say, well, if you do that, then your operator doesn't have to worry about not breaking his leg, so he can focus on his work. And this kind of conversations are not enough held. So we need to unpack this high-level ambitions, which we talk in the UN and also in senior business and so on circles, to something which is relevant to the small business operator and speak to a certain extent to all of them. I think then generally people would like to do the right thing, even in their business, and they would like to take also a degree of care. And we can discuss the degree, but people are intentionally, can be argued that this is in your own interest. We can bring diversity. This brings you better outcomes, better performance, and so on. So that's a little bit as a follow-up. But coming back to global value chains, I think global value chains and international trade can certainly help, because Venkat was also referring to the role of the brands of setting the agenda. And saying that zero carbon is non-negotiable. We might negotiate on the timeline, but this is the direction we have to go. And I think that these goals and zero child labor, zero impact on biodiversity loss, and so on, these goals are clearly articulated by some of the leading firms in the global value chains who sit at the top. And even though this process is incredibly slow, it percolates down, and that will set the agenda. So we see I think generally in the last 5 years, we have seen the agenda change from arguing whether it should be zero or something else to now a discussion like, well, how do we get to zero? Because clearly we cannot get to zero with the known technologies and the known solutions. So we need these innovations, and that's some of the work that UNIDO is doing. I think that the global value chains are also important in the sense that there's an aspiration to participate in global value chains, but to participate in global value chains, one needs performance. So one cannot participate if one is in the traditional, if I may call that Jugaad kind of manufacturing environment. One needs to have a basic level of performance, and which includes environmental performance and productivity and innovation. So wanting to be in the global value chain is automatically meaning that you have to up your sustainability performance. Once you're in global value chains, there is of course the learning in global value chains which is happening, and technology transfer, which will help you to drive further performance. So I think that participation in global value chains is certainly good, but also what we have seen with the pandemic, value chains are in a big flux right now. So we see relocation of production happening in the global value chains. And that is very visible. We see more resilience and redundancy being built in value chains. But what is also coming up is more a connect between in the value chains between manufacturing hubs and innovation hubs, where this was in the last 2 decades probably been very dispersed. One place you innovate, other place you manufacture. But we've seen that with the pandemic, these were the companies that were most vulnerable. So they are looking at more integrated manufacturing, innovation, and product development spaces. And that's also enabled by the digital transformation. So I think that the global value chains, which are typically then with the export processing zones and so on, that will become less relevant. It will become more relevant to become an innovation and manufacturing hubs of the future. So people have said we are about to reset to global value chains 2.0 or so. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Right. Venkat, if I can come to you, what are the barriers to sustainability then? Is it competition, the pressure for buyers to launch new lines, lack of transparency in the textile supply chain, lack of regulation, or the model of take, make, and dispose? What is it? What is it that you see?
The secret option, the last option, which is all of the above, to be honest. But I think the crude answer, and I think it kind of also links back to what Kunal was saying earlier, which is relatively speaking, business models can be figured out. So if you think about simple problems, complicated problems, and complex problems, right? Business models are not complex problems like human systems, right? They can be, you can figure it out one way or another. The bigger challenge, and rightly so, it needs to trickle down from the boardroom conversations to everyone saying, this is actually required not because somebody is asking us to do it or asking us to operate in a certain way. But I think the mental models need to be figured out first. And I think that's a bigger challenge. And I'll give you an example from a different sector, right? So I've spent a good part of the last few decades in the innovation transformation space, and I was working with a large European bank. There's a very popular notion that the banking and financial institutions are one of the largest to jump onto the digital and innovation bandwagon, right? And that's because the most banks, and I think this was a large European bank in particular, the thinking starts with saying, look, I've spent the last 40, 50 years building physical assets all over the world, right? So the sunk cost fallacy, which is I've already invested so much, can I just get rid of them overnight and kind of rebuild from scratch? And I think that's a very difficult threshold to cross for most leaders. That's one. Second, I think, and the unfortunate part which doesn't get articulated as much is the thing about chief executives, like most politicians, is the musical chairs, right? You are there for 4 years, 5 year stints, right? So, and you start wondering whether is this a problem statement that I want to deal with, and how much can I actually make a difference in 3-4 years that I'm going to be at the helm? So what can I do? What is the low hanging fruit, the easier solvable problem statements that can, improve my bottom line and top line, and I come out looking really good. There are very few people who can actually make that call and say, look, it's not just about what I'm going to achieve in the short term, but what can I give away in the short term so that I'm going to build a legacy which lives beyond me. That's number one. Number two is unfortunate part of it, and a lot of these, UNIDO's FLCD program is a case in point. That's a platform which makes it easy for the set of innovators in that whole broader low carbon tech space to have a platform and access to a little bit of capital so that they can do demonstration with different sectors and different players. And that becomes easy for partners like us to pick them up and saying, let's go and introduce you to 10 other brands and manufacturers, and we'll cover the cost of running a pilot or doing a demonstration, for example, right? For most options, the lack of the entire value chain, so the supply side and the demand side. So any solution, there's a supply side and the demand side, right? So unless you figure out how the entire value chain looks like, it's always going to be cost prohibitive for any organization to pick up a solution and run with it. So how do you tackle that? And a case in point is we're trying to, and we've had a fair bit of encouraging results over the last 18, 24 months. We're looking at some versions of a PPP model, or maybe some our own take on a PPP model, which is, look, we need you to have a skin in the game. So let's say I'll bring in some form of public capital, commercial, non-commercial, whatever forms are there, where somebody else is putting the money to do the testing, validation of a solution, for example. All we need you to do, and that's not a large sum of money to run a pilot or to do a validation, right? And all we need is a team and resource that you're dedicating. So that's your version of skin in the game, to make sure that should this be successful, you're at least willing to put a sum of money on the table to do the R&D and the commercialization and scaling within the organization. So this is based on outcomes. So I'm saying, what's in it for us? What's in it for you? If we had to create economic value for you as an organization in pure, business sense, I'm going to cover the first phase through a partner who's willing to bet on, for whatever reasons. In the second phase, we reduce the public capital to 60%, 70%, and you match your in-kind support from phase one with some form of money in phase two. Eventually, as you scale and as you start recognizing the value of implementing an energy efficiency solution, which has a potential to reduce your costs by 15, 25%, which is quite significant, or water efficiency solutions for that matter. You start recognizing those values in year 2, year 3, you have the confidence to back it up with actual money is on the table. So that's one version, right? Because at the end of the day, we're all human beings. Everyone, whether we state it, very openly or not, we're all asking the question, what's in it for me? And I think that's the question you need to have. We tend to have with a lot of these leaders and sustainability heads and brand managers, and just saying, can I understand what's in it for you? What are you trying to solve for? How can I make you look good within your organization? What are some of those goals that we can help you with? And I think it's a conversation that needs to happen well beyond the sustainability teams, right? Because I fundamentally believe that it's not an agenda that only one individual or one team can lead. It has to be embedded into every single individual's process. The last thing, it certainly helps when you have the enabling environment, which is the policy framing. But it comes with a caveat, right? And CSR is one of my pet peeves around CSR is you tend to do things for compliance, or you tend to do it because it's the right thing to do. And it's not, I'm not positioning it as a morality question saying it's the right thing to do and you need to do it. But when you start doing things, or when you start framing policy which goes down that compliance road, then it's not scalable or sustainable to my mind. I think there's a fair bit of recorded history which talks about both penalties and incentives do not really work at scale and can't sustain themselves. But I'll just pause there. And I think it's a combination of lots of things. But fundamentally, it's about competitive spirit, and it's about everyone trying to outlast the other, but without really any concern for why do we exist in business to start with.
True. Mahadev, what do you think is the role of technology and innovation? Do you think it can actually aid businesses in the sustainability journey and transition? Like Rene mentioned, Jugaad probably will not.
Yeah, let me start with this, right? Human civilization is pretty much defined and identified with technology and innovation. Whatever good we do, whatever bad we do, there is an element of technology there. We invented plastic, which is one of the greatest innovations. It increased our healthcare, it increased food security, increased transport safety, and many more things to say. But the misuse of that technology has resulted tons and tons of plastic pollution that has threatened a lot of life on land, on under the sea as well, right? So we definitely need better technologies to undo the harm that we've already caused on the environment. Without technology, it is close to impossible. Taking the analogy of technology, I mean plastics itself, right? Plastics is always compared with the likes of paper and steel, that they are more circular, they are infinitely recyclable, whereas plastic results in pollution. But look at paper and steel. They've been used for many centuries, I mean, thousands of years. And over a period of time, we've understood how to put them to recycle, how to use them in a circular fashion. Plastic has been around for like last 30, 40 years. I mean, at least it's extensive use. So there has to be tremendous focus on first, can we make plastics instead of fossil resource from a bio-renewable resource? Can we make plastics more durable that it can cater to multiple applications? Can we make plastics that can be recycled at its end of use at local centers instead of segregating, taken to different centralized locations for reprocessing? So these are things that we need to answer ourselves instead of saying plastic cannot be, let's say, recycled. It's creating pollution, so let's stop using plastic. That's a very, very incorrect, non-technological, non-methodical solution to avoiding this plastic. The same analogy can be applied to many other solutions. For example, home automation solution, home office automation kit, that can be helped to reduce energy consumption in our offices and house, right? One other area that I personally think that technology can play a role is, in order to drive sustainable results, we definitely need to ensure there is transparency and accountability. Today, there is madness and all sort of marketable claims, which in many ways are actually greenwashing. So what it is referred to, don't have enough transparency, don't have enough data to back. I think there is need and urgency to establish transparent and accountable systems, which is possible with the new age digital solutions, right? So to drive accountability and transparency, again, we need technologies that can bring in and drive such agenda. So I personally believe technology and innovation is required. Just because we find a problem, undoing it does not mean we should stop using it. We have to find solutions, make advancements to move forward. That's how I would summarize. Thank you.
Kunal, you've already talked about it, but from your experience, how can we significantly enhance the influence of sustainability in broader economic sphere, social and political agenda? Larger companies may be more cognizant of the fact and it will be easier to talk to, but how do you make meaningful conversations with smaller businesses?
With smaller businesses? Is that what your last words were? First, I completely endorse what Mahadev just said. You know, that technology and innovation is so important. But what's even more important is that we, as a species, are proud of who we are when we arrive at what we consider the singularity, when man and machine start to fuse, and we see this exponential innovation age kick in. It's already started. I think the most important thing is that we don't blame the system. That's different from keeping them accountable. You know, it's become kind of like a dog and pony show, a little bit. I hate to call it that. And also, ironically, my world of climate change and, we the planet and we the people, it's become a blood sport. So it's so ironic that we live in a world where we have to look after each other and keep each other accountable at the same time. And we're chasing after these rainbows, like, are you a benefit corp? Have you been B certified? And then once you get that certification, it's almost like the same thing as an ISO certification in the factory. I'm done. My work is done. We've got this certification. We are holier than thou as far as sustainability is concerned. So I think that's what we need to measure and bring into perspective when talking to small businesses tomorrow. How much of it is posing and posturing versus actually getting stuff done, which is another word I would have said, but this is TV, so I'm not going to say it. But actually getting stuff done in the real world to make sure that, you're proud of who you are. You're proud of what you've built. You're proud of, your attributes matter as much as your technology, so that there's that whole thing about, technology will become your master and you'll become the slave, or you have to make technology the master, the slave, and it's all semantics. The truth is both can be masters. And that's the power of today. You can actually, for the first time in our lives, go further and faster than ever before alongside technology. And technology can become your ally You don't have to see it as your enemy. And I feel like that's one of the most powerful things about innovation and bringing it to the small businesses is they are able to do things that big businesses sometimes can't. They can't they can't disrupt and be disruptive by design. They can't have these, meaning the bigger, companies, they have to follow a certain protocol. And usually you see innovation on the edges of those companies, right? And I feel like that's something that we as, people or just global citizens can offer these small businesses. It's the frameworks that UNIDO, I just say UNIDO usually, have to offer IDEO or Singularity University, or there's so many places that you can go to today, right? Y Combinator, there's so many places where you can harness the power of innovation, and then you couple that with the power of community and leadership. I think you'll actually have a great chance at not only creating a sustainable organization, but an exponential one that permeates throughout all of the sustainable development goals. So for me, I think that's the key is just to keep focused on getting stuff done.
Getting stuff done.
Yeah, well, getting stuff done is the politically correct way of saying it.
So I think we're running out of time. Last question, will stay same for all of you almost in parts. But when it comes to getting stuff done, Rene, there is something called the cost versus benefit. For a larger company, it might be easier to be green, but can small business effort to be sustainable? It's very easy for a small business to say, it's just too costly.
Yes, that's an often heard argument, and I think it's fair that the resources for large business in terms of technology management resources and accessing finance it's easier. But the flip side of that also means that the large business have done the easy work. So for the small business, there are still some low-hanging fruits available, which have not been picked up. And I think that is really where the rubber hits the road. That we could say to small business that the perception that is very expensive is often ill-informed by not having looked at the issues. So if we look at how much is your energy cost, and if you can, if you save energy, and Venkat was referring to that, it's not just the same as making more turnover. No, it's actually adding directly to your bottom line. So if you have this conversation on how material the environment is, I think we can get many people on board and see how they can actually contribute. You look at the cost of waste management, which are also often overlooked. So it's more about having a conversation and making clear that actually the environment is material to even small businesses. And then, of course, we need to find the ways and means that we can provide the knowledge and the technology to small business. So we need to invest in the ecosystem supporting small businesses for sure. Thank you.
Right. Venkat, even when it comes to textile and apparel, it's a sector largely dotted with smaller players. How does one incentivize them to, take the sustainable route? For most of these units, profit maximization remains the key.
That's a pretty good question. And I think it also ties back with what Rene was saying and what Kunal was alluding to a little earlier, right? So it's easier to address an aggregated audience, right? So, or one large organization, because you can straight away, the kind of business and the kind of scale that you can get from landing a large customer is very different from, talking to 10 different customers or stakeholders, or geographically spread or very fragmented in any sense of the word. I think one way that we are trying to address that is how can we create a platform so that instead of, let's say, let me take, the UNIDO's FLCD program. So instead of each brand or a manufacturer within the sector who's trying to identify who are possibly the solutions that are there on energy efficiency, here is a platform that can straight away give you access to 50 that have gone through the program over the last 3 years, for example, and it gives you a proper, evidence in terms of due diligence and everything else that they've gone through. So that's one way to do it. Second way to do it is, for example, a platform that we've created called the CIF Conclave as part of the Sankalp Global Summit, where it becomes a platform for impact entrepreneurs or social entrepreneurs across different aspects of different sectors who can come together have a conversation with potential investors and funders, impact investors of all shapes, sizes, and colors, or innovators and brands and manufacturers, so that you're creating that environment where that more conversations and productive conversations can happen, right? So you need to create that enabling environment, so to say, in which instead of a unit of one, you can have a conversation and you can enable solution providers to the supply side actors to connect with the demand side actors, right? So that's the essential requirement of collaboration to happen. So how does the collaboration happen? So you need to create that platform. Y Combinator in that sense of the word is one of those platforms, right? Or anything else. So you look at platform in the broader sense of the word and seeing how does that enable conversations and more conversations, and hopefully better outcomes coming out of those many conversations, rather than having 10 individual conversations across. A case in point is, can you speak to, instead of going and talking to 10 different manufacturing units, can you perhaps identify a body within, let's say, the Tirupur textile hub, right? Because then that body or that one individual or one group of individuals can give you access to those 100 manufacturing units of different size and scale that you can go and talk to in terms of saving energy by 15-20% year on year. So creating that environment or a platform where you can talk to these guys as an aggregated audience, to my mind, is a critical lever that we could use.
Right. Mahadev, do you find it easy to talk to other stakeholders in different sectors that you should be clean, you should be sustainable? Is that an easy conversation to have? Are people perceptive around it? Are regulations in place which help players like you to help others in the sustainability transition?
See, in terms of sustainability, right? People understand very well the energy side of sustainability, the transport side of sustainability, which is like the scope 1 and scope 2 aspect of sustainability. And in the last decade or so, there has been enough investments, enough communication around this transition from fossil-based energy to renewable energy, which is all good, right? But that can only solve 50% of the problem. When we talk to the stakeholders, most of them are receptive of the idea, but whether that idea translates into action and action translating into business, I think the percentage would be anywhere between 5 to 10%. And it also depends on the kind of stakeholders that we talk to. Most of the strategic stakeholders, the top-down stakeholders, are very interested because they see this is the future. But then when we get to the middle order, each departments have their own conflicting priorities. By the time I move from R&D department to the, let's say, product management to the commercial, their priorities have changed. And added to that, their roles change, right? So all these complexities are there working with larger organizations. But clearly, if India has to achieve carbon neutrality by 2070, just moving the energy and making it renewable is not going to be sufficient. We have to start looking at identifying more sustainable materials and circular solutions. And when it comes to identifying and incentivizing, I think there is lack of framework there. For example, there is a huge ban on single-use plastics, right? And the ban is primarily because the single-use plastic cannot be recycled easily. It is causing pollution and stuff. But the framework permits more problematic solutions, which are much more carbon intensive, either it is paper, bagasse, wood, than the plastics would otherwise be, right? The solutions may seem right from a pollution standpoint, but if you actually carefully assess the carbon footprint or life cycle assessment of how much of water usage or discharge of waste in this manufacturing process, they are not ideal replacements for the current single-use plastic. Fundamental question has to be, are we looking for one single-use product to be replaced by another single-use product? That itself is a fundamental shift that we need to bring. We need to bring in awareness around circular solutions where products have to be made, they have to last longer, and they have to be recycled versus the comfort that we have today where we can go to a restaurant, buy, eat, throw, and then walk away, right? That shift needs to happen. And that's a gradual shift. That's what we see as we are engaging with multiple stakeholders.
Very interesting, Mahadev. Kunal, last word to you, and question almost remains the same. Here is a small business who is thinking about profitability, has been hit by the pandemic, and here is Kunal who is walking up to them and saying that please be sustainable, please be green. How can that happen?
Well, I think everyone's really alluded to a lot of ways in which we can make that happen. I'm going to go a little less into the technical and more into the human element of this. The most important thing for us, at least I've learned through the pandemic, is that we can get through this, right? A lot of people were uncertain when COVID-19 hit, right? And so the saying, "This too shall pass," truly came to bear faster than we thought. I'm a curator, right, of the future, and I used to do summits, and I thought, oh my God, I'm never going to see the light of day again. I might as well go back home and figure out a new life for myself. And here, TED just happened. TED is a conference that happens in Vancouver, where we spread ideas that hopefully change the world. A week ago, the Davos is happening next month, and we're still in the pandemic, right? So I think it's more important that we, as human beings, rely on building our attributes, not just our skill sets. And what I mean by that is building your moral courage muscle, expanding your horizon for compassion. These are all things that are never really talked about in a business room because they're considered very like hokey pokey, soft skill. But if you look at it, that's the essence of what's necessary here and now. These attributes of moral courage, expansive compassion, and the ability to do, anything and change everything no matter what, like whether it's a pandemic or a war. We're in the middle of both right now. I mean, there's another elephant in the room. There's not just one elephant, there's like two elephants in the room right now in the world. So for me to tell a small business, I think the most important thing is to develop your resilience, because you're always going to be punched in the face, even if you have a bulletproof plan, right? And then you're going to have to figure out how to pivot, turn, and iterate and get back up and keep moving forward. Right? So for me, that is the essence of getting stuff done in the world. It's like having the moral courage, getting back up and keep moving forward. It's not how hard you hit. It's the Rocky saying of how hard you get hit. We've been hit really hard, but what matters most is that we get back up and keep moving forward and have each other's backs and look after each other. No matter whether you're in India or the United States or in Ghana, we just have to do it together. That's fundamentally, I believe, the power of getting things done together, is very, very important for the future of a sustainable world.
Clearly, we all have a challenge that to rise up to, and there is a clear need for businesses probably to find harmony between profitability and concerns for the environment. Technology, capital, innovation, and a strong will can probably help us achieve that harmony. Thank you to all of you for joining us. And this was a fascinating discussion. Thank you once again.